Power of the Table. Written by Salehe. Chapter 1. What the table represents. Power is not just about who speaks, it begins with who sits at the table. The symbol of the table. Throughout history, the table has been more than just furniture. It has been a stage where decisions, destinies, and deals are shaped. Around tables, kings signed peace treaties, business founders drafted visions, and families broke bread to sustain love and unity. Every table tells a story of who belongs, who decides, and who benefits. It can be a place of inclusion or exclusion, harmony or hierarchy. The table represents access, and access determines power. When leaders speak of having a seat at the table, they are not simply asking for comfort. They are asking for recognition, participation, and influence. To be at the table is to be visible, to be counted among those whose voices matter when choices are made. Tables of power throughout history. In ancient times, rulers gathered at war councils, round tables that symbolized equality among generals. The legendary King Arthur used a round table so that no knight would sit at the head, reminding everyone that true leadership is shared. At the other extreme, many empires preferred rectangular tables, with the ruler seated at the far end, elevated and commanding. That design communicated hierarchy, one source of authority, many followers. Even in modern leadership, the design of the table reflects the design of leadership. Some tables are long and narrow, designed for commands to flow downward. Others are circular, designed for collaboration. A wise leader understands both designs, knowing when to assert direction and when to create dialogue. The hidden message in every seat. Every seat at the table carries unspoken meaning. Who sits closest to the leader? Who sits farthest? Who is missing altogether? Observe any boardroom, cabinet, or committee. Placement is often power. But leadership maturity is seen not in how close you sit to authority, but in how you use your influence wherever you sit. A true leader does not wait for the best seat. They bring value from any seat. They understand that presence is not measured by position, but by participation, the courage to contribute thoughtfully and the humility to listen deeply. Leadership as shared space. The table also teaches us about shared space. Leadership is not ownership, it is stewardship. When leaders view the table as theirs, they build barriers. When they view it as ours, they build bridges. True power multiplies when it is shared. Great leaders set the table for others, not out of weakness, but wisdom. They understand that every additional voice adds perspective, and perspective leads to better decisions. Inclusion is not about making the table crowded. It's about making it complete. Conversations that create change. Every major transformation begins with a conversation, and most conversations happen at a table. At diplomatic summits, leaders sit face-to-face to end wars. In boardrooms, innovators brainstorm the next big solution. In community centers, citizens gather to plan progress. The table becomes a bridge between ideas and action. Leadership, at its core, is the art of facilitating meaningful conversation. The kind that transforms confusion into clarity, conflict into consensus, and vision into movement. So, the question is not whether you have a table, but what happens when people sit there. The table as a mirror of culture. Walk into any organization and look at its table, both literal and metaphorical. Who speaks most? Who is silent? Who gets invited to strategy meetings, and who learns decisions secondhand? That table reveals the organization's true culture. Titles and slogans can be deceiving, but tables never lie. An inclusive table signals humility and curiosity. A closed one reveals fear and control. Culture begins not in the mission statement, but in the seating arrangement, in who gets heard. Leaders must constantly ask, have we created a culture of conversation or a culture of compliance? Power, position, and purpose. Power at the table can be misused or multiplied. Some leaders use the table to control others. Wise leaders use it to connect them. Control-based power says, do as I say. Connection-based power says, let's do this together. The first breeds obedience, the second breeds ownership. The first demands silence, the second invites speech. Every leader must decide, will my table silence others or strengthen them? The empty chair principle. In every meeting, leave one chair empty, symbolically or literally. That chair represents the voice not yet heard, the junior staff, the customer, the future generation, or the marginalized community. This empty chair reminds us that leadership is not about filling the table with friends or allies, but with perspectives that challenge us to grow. Great leaders do not just count who is seated, they care about who is missing. They make room. The table and the test of ego. Every leader faces a test at the table, the temptation of ego. It's easy to confuse the table's power with personal power. When applause grows loud, some leaders forget that the table existed before them and will remain after them. Humility is knowing that you are not the table. You are merely a steward of the conversation happening upon it. When leaders learn to manage their ego, the table becomes a place of wisdom. When they don't, it becomes a battlefield of pride. A living metaphor. As you progress through this book, keep the image of the table alive in your mind. Every time you meet, mentor, or make a decision, you are sitting at some form of table. Ask yourself, what kind of table am I building? Who is invited to sit with me? What kind of conversations do I encourage? Am I using my seat to dominate or to develop others? Leadership is not about owning the table. It is about transforming it into a space of purpose, partnership, and progress. Reflection questions. 1. Think of a recent meeting or gathering you attended. What did the table look like, and what did it reveal about power and participation? 2. Who is currently missing from your table, and what could be gained by inviting them? 3. Do you see your leadership table as mine or ours? 4. How do you ensure your table remains a place of dialogue rather than dominance? Key takeaway. The table is not a piece of furniture. It is a philosophy of leadership. Every leader, at some point, must decide what their table stands for. Will it divide or unite? Will it silence or empower? Will it end with you or extend beyond you? The power of the table lies not in its shape or size, but in the spirit of those seated around it. When leaders understand that, they begin to lead not just with authority, but with authenticity. Chapter 2. Earning your seat. You don't demand a seat at the table. You demonstrate why you belong there. The myth of the instant leader. In every generation, there's a temptation to want influence fast, to skip the process and go straight to the power seat. But leadership doesn't work that way. The table of leadership is not a stage for ego. It is a platform for earned trust. You cannot sit confidently at any table you have not prepared for. Influence is not granted by invitation. It is earned by preparation, character, and contribution. Great leaders rise not because someone pulled out a chair for them, but because they proved they could handle the responsibility that comes with sitting down. Preparation before position. Before you earn your seat, you must prepare for it. Preparation is the quiet, often unseen work that turns potential into purpose. Think of an athlete. The public only sees the medal ceremony, not the thousands of invisible hours of training. The same is true for leadership. The most effective leaders are those who trained long before anyone noticed them. They read when others relaxed. They listened when others spoke. They served when others demanded. They built credibility, one small act at a time. When your moment comes, when the seat finally opens, your preparation will speak louder than your resume. The currency of credibility. Leadership seats are not bought with money or status. They are earned through credibility, the invisible currency of trust. Credibility is built on 3 foundations. 1. Character, who you are when no one is watching. 2. Competence, what you can consistently deliver. 3. Consistency, how reliably you align your words and actions. Lose one, and your influence weakens. Strengthen all 3, and you become the kind of person others naturally want at the table. Case example, the quiet contributor. Consider Amina, a mid-level manager in a large organization. For years, she sat silently in meetings, watching louder colleagues dominate discussions. Yet outside the boardroom, Amina was the one who solved complex problems, mentored juniors, and finished difficult projects. One day, during a major crisis, her director turned to her and said, "Amina, what do you think?" Her calm, structured response turned the entire discussion around. From that day, she wasn't just in the room, she was at the table. The lesson: your competence will always call your name when the moment comes. You don't have to shout for recognition. Let your work speak for you. The mindset of contribution. Earning a seat is not about self-promotion, it's about contribution. Leaders who come to the table asking, "What can I get?" rarely last long. Those who ask, "What can I give?" are the ones others keep inviting back. Contribution is the proof of purpose. Every table has limited space, and those who fill it must add value. Whether through ideas, solutions, or encouragement, your presence should make the table stronger, smarter, and more focused. So, when you enter any meeting, decision, or relationship, ask yourself, what value am I bringing to this table today? Humility, the hidden door to greatness. True leaders never confuse humility with weakness. Humility is the recognition that you are still learning, even when you lead. Some people lose their seat not because they lack talent, but because they let pride take the chair before they did. Arrogance is like sitting at the head of the table before you've been invited. Everyone notices, and no one forgets. Humility, however, invites mentorship, trust, and collaboration. It allows others to invest in you because you're teachable. And the more teachable you remain, the faster your influence grows. Learning from every table. Even when you are not yet invited to the main table, you are always learning from one. The classroom table teaches discipline. The family table teaches patience and empathy. The workplace table teaches collaboration. The crisis table teaches courage and clarity. Each experience adds a layer of wisdom that prepares you for greater leadership. Never underestimate the smaller tables. They are the training grounds for the bigger ones. Earning respect, not fear. Some leaders mistakenly believe they must command respect through authority or intimidation. But fear is a fragile foundation. When fear fades, rebellion rises. Respect, however, endures because it is earned through integrity. People may obey a fearful leader temporarily, but they will follow a respected leader willingly and long-term. Earning your seat means people trust your judgment, not just your job title. They respect the way you listen, decide, and lead under pressure. Your voice and your value. Once you earn your seat, your voice becomes part of the table's power. But remember, having a seat does not mean dominating the conversation. It means adding value when it matters most. Leadership is knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. It's the discipline to use your words as instruments of progress, not weapons of pride. Every contribution should move the table closer to its purpose, not your personal agenda. Signs you've earned your seat. You know you've truly earned your seat when people seek your opinion, even when you're not the senior person. Your presence brings calm and focus to discussions. You can disagree respectfully without being dismissed. You use your influence to uplift others, not exclude them. The table feels incomplete when you're absent. Earning your seat isn't about recognition, it's about relevance. You matter because you make things better. Reflection questions. 1. What table are you currently trying to earn a seat at, and what preparation is still required? 2. How do you demonstrate credibility in your daily work and relationships? 3. Are you contributing more value than you are seeking? 4. What small tables, meetings, projects, roles are preparing you for larger influence? 5. In what areas do you need to replace pride with humility to grow faster? Key takeaway. Leadership seats are earned, not assigned. Your credibility is your invitation. Your character is your foundation. Your consistency is your guarantee. When preparation meets opportunity, you will not need to demand a seat. The table will make room for you. Chapter 3. The language of the table. Your voice is your signature at the table. It can build bridges or burn them. The silent power of words. Leadership doesn't begin when you receive a title. It begins when people start listening to you. The table gives everyone a chance to speak, but only a few can truly communicate. Words are not just sounds. They are signals of thought, maturity, and self-awareness. The way a leader speaks, tone, timing, and truth determines whether others open their minds or close their hearts. A great leader understands that communication is not about talking more, but connecting deeper. When words build or break, every table has two kinds of voices. One, builders, who use words to unite, uplift, and clarify. Two, breakers, who use words to divide, demean, or confuse. The difference lies not in vocabulary, but in intention. A builder speaks to add light. A breaker speaks to add noise. Leadership demands that your voice becomes a tool of trust. When people hear you speak, they should feel two things. I understand. I'm understood. If both are true, you are leading with emotional intelligence. The language of listening. The most influential people at any table are not always the ones who talk the most. They are often the ones who listen the best. Listening is not passive. It is an act of leadership. It shows respect, curiosity, and control. It tells others, you matter. When leaders listen, they gather wisdom before speaking. They reduce conflict before it explodes, and they build loyalty that no title can command. Try the 3-turn rule in your next meeting. 1. Listen completely to what's being said. 2. Pause before responding, process, don't react. 3. Respond only after ensuring understanding. This small discipline transforms meetings from debates into dialogues. Tone, the hidden leader. What you say matters, but how you say it often matters more. Tone is leadership's invisible message. A harsh tone can destroy a great idea. A calm tone can rescue a difficult conversation. A hopeful tone can reignite a discouraged team. Your tone reflects your internal state. The more self-aware you are, the more control you have over how others experience you. Leaders who master tone communicate confidence without arrogance, passion without aggression, and authority without intimidation. The art of clarity. At the table, confusion is the enemy of progress. A leader's duty is not to sound intelligent, it's to make others feel intelligent. Clarity inspires action. Complexity breeds avoidance. Great leaders speak in simple, structured language. They define goals, explain reasons, and connect ideas to purpose. Remember, if people leave your table unsure of what to do next, you have led a discussion, not a decision. Before every meeting ends, clarify the what, why, and how. What are we doing? Why does it matter? How will we measure success? Clarity turns conversation into commitment. Emotion, the unspoken language. The table is not just a place of logic, it's a theater of emotion. Every discussion carries undercurrents of pride, fear, hope, or frustration. A wise leader reads those emotions as fluently as words. They sense tension, notice silence, and adjust accordingly. This is emotional intelligence in action, the ability to understand emotions, yours and others, and respond constructively. When people feel emotionally safe, they speak honestly. When they feel threatened, they withdraw. So, a leader's first task at the table is not to control the conversation, but to create a safe space for truth. Persuasion versus manipulation. Leadership often requires convincing others, but persuasion must never become manipulation. Persuasion appeals to reason and respect. Manipulation appeals to fear and guilt. Persuasion invites others to agree because they believe. Manipulation forces them to agree because they fear. The first builds trust, the second destroys it. True persuasion starts with empathy, understanding what matters to others and aligning it with the shared mission. The courage to speak truth. At some tables, truth is expensive. People hesitate to speak up because of politics, fear, or hierarchy. But leadership requires moral courage, the strength to voice what others only whisper. Speaking truth is not rebellion, it's responsibility. You don't speak to embarrass, you speak to enlighten. When leaders normalize honesty, even uncomfortable truths become catalysts for growth. Silence may keep peace for a moment, but truth sustains peace for the future. Bridging differences. In every leadership table, disagreements are inevitable. But conflict is not failure, it's friction that can sharpen ideas when handled wisely. The goal is not to win arguments. It's to win alignment. Leaders bridge differences through respectful dialogue. Focus on ideas, not egos. Ask questions before making judgments. Find common ground before finding fault. When you communicate with empathy and precision, diversity of thought becomes your greatest strength. When silence speaks louder. Not every message requires words. Sometimes silence is the most powerful language a leader can use. Silence can communicate reflection, respect, or restraint. It can disarm hostility or invite contribution. At times, saying nothing gives others the space to say something meaningful. But remember, silence should never become avoidance. Use it as a pause, not an escape. Reflection questions. 1. How do people feel after you speak? Motivated, defensive, or inspired? 2. Do you listen to respond or listen to understand? 3. How can you use tone and timing more effectively in your communication? 4. When was the last time you spoke a necessary truth, even when it was uncomfortable? 5. What can you do to make your table a safer space for honest dialogue? Key takeaway. Words are tools of leadership. Use them to build, not to break. Speak with clarity, not complexity. Listen to understand, not to reply. And when you speak, let your words carry grace, gravity, and guidance, because your language defines your leadership. Chapter 4. The Power of Presence. Before you speak, you are already communicating. The moment you enter the room. Every leader has a presence, a silent message that arrives before their words do. People can sense it, confidence or insecurity, calm or chaos, humility or arrogance. The table responds not first to your title, but to your energy. Leadership presence is not about physical appearance or loudness. It's about the quiet confidence that says, I belong here, and I'm here to make this space better. Whether you walk into a boardroom, classroom, or community hall, the question is the same. What does your presence say before you say anything? Defining leadership presence. Presence is the sum of 3 elements. 1. Confidence, the belief in your ability to add value. 2. Composure, the ability to stay calm under pressure. 3. Connection, the ability to make others feel seen and respected. Confidence draws attention. Composure earns trust. Connection wins loyalty. A leader who masters all 3 commands the table without demanding it. Confidence without arrogance. Confidence is attractive, arrogance is repulsive. The difference lies in intent. Confidence focuses on purpose, arrogance focuses on position. A confident leader enters the room to contribute. An arrogant leader enters to control. True confidence doesn't shout, it shows. It shows in posture, eye contact, and authenticity. You can't fake it, people feel it immediately. And when you truly believe in your message and mission, you won't need to exaggerate or impress. Your conviction will do the talking. The power of body language. Even before words, your body speaks. The way you sit, stand, and look tells people how secure you are. Simple, powerful habits build your nonverbal leadership presence. Sit upright, it shows readiness and attention. Keep your shoulders open, it signals confidence, not defense. Maintain steady eye contact, it conveys honesty. Not occasionally. It shows engagement and respect. Avoid restless gestures. They suggest anxiety or distraction. Body language is the mirror of your mindset. If your posture is closed, your leadership message is too. Composure, the leader's inner calm. Every table will test your emotions through criticism, conflict, or chaos. In those moments, presence becomes power. Composure is the ability to stay grounded when others are losing balance. It doesn't mean you don't feel pressure. It means you don't let pressure control your performance. When everyone else raises their voice, a composed leader lowers theirs. When others panic, they pause. When others attack, they analyze. The calmest person in the room often becomes the most respected. The magnetic force of authenticity. People can sense when you're pretending. They can also sense when you're being real. Authenticity is magnetic. It draws people toward you because it feels safe. Leaders who show their human side earn deeper trust than those who hide behind perfection. Authenticity doesn't mean oversharing. It means being consistent, the same person in every space. When your values, tone, and behavior align, your presence becomes powerful and predictable. Respecting the space. Leaders who respect the table respect the people at it. That means arriving prepared and on time, listening without interrupting, valuing every contribution, even from quieter voices, acknowledging others' efforts publicly. Presence is not about commanding the spotlight. It's about elevating the room so everyone feels it's safe to shine. Presence in virtual leadership. In today's world, leadership often happens through screens, video meetings, online communities, or global collaborations. But presence still matters, even digitally. You can project leadership online by keeping your camera on, showing attentiveness, looking into the lens, not at your reflection, speaking clearly and concisely, eliminating distractions, no multitasking, showing gratitude and warmth through your voice. Whether physical or virtual, presence is the art of being fully there. Distraction is the opposite of presence. Energy and the emotional climate. Leaders set the emotional temperature of the table. If you're anxious, the room becomes anxious. If you're hopeful, the room becomes hopeful. Your energy is contagious, so manage it intentionally. Before entering any leadership space, ask yourself, what kind of energy am I bringing today? Will it lift or lower the people around me? Sometimes the best preparation isn't rereading your notes, it's resetting your mindset. Presence under pressure. When the spotlight is on you, perhaps during a crisis or presentation, your presence is tested most. Here, how great leaders maintain composure. 1. Breathe before you respond. A deep breath buys you control. 2. Focus on solutions, not blame. People follow calm clarity. 3. Lower your tone. Quiet confidence disarms chaos. 4. Reaffirm purpose. Remind others why you're all at the table. Pressure exposes what's inside you, preparation, or panic. Cultivate inner peace so that when the storm comes, your presence becomes the anchor. The presence legacy. Your presence is your silent legacy. Long after you leave the room, people will remember how you made them feel, empowered or diminished, inspired or ignored. Strive to leave every table more hopeful, more focused, and more united than you found it. That's the mark of enduring influence. As leadership expert John Maxwell says, people may forget what you said, but they will never forget how you made them feel. Your presence is that feeling, your lasting imprint. Reflection questions. 1. How do people feel when you enter a room, tense, calm, or encouraged? 2. What is one habit, posture, tone, or behavior you could adjust to strengthen your presence? 3. When was the last time you remained calm during conflict, and how did it affect others? 4. How do you prepare your energy before important meetings or conversations? 5. What legacy of presence do you want to leave behind in every room you enter? Key takeaway. Your presence is your silent speech. Before you lead others, you must lead your own energy. Confidence, composure, and connection. These are the 3 pillars of leadership presence. You don't have to be the loudest person at the table to have power. You just have to be the most centered one. Chapter 5. Setting the table for others. Leadership is not about claiming the best seat. It's about creating space for others to sit, speak, and be seen. When you've been invited to the table, the one where decisions are made, directions are set, and futures are shaped, it's easy to focus on what you can contribute. But transformative leadership asks a deeper question. Who else needs to be here? Great leaders don't just take a seat, they extend the table. Not only but also, leadership is not about the size of your seat at the table. It's about how many chairs you pull up for others. In every field and generation, the most powerful leaders are not those who dominate conversations, but those who create space for new voices. They recognize that influence multiplies, not when it is hoarded, but when it is shared. The table as a metaphor for power. Every organization has a table. Sometimes it's a literal boardroom, sometimes it's a Zoom screen, sometimes it's an invisible circle of influence. But regardless of form, the table represents something bigger. Who gets access to power, to voice, to vision? Inclusive leaders are aware of who's missing. They notice the silence. They sense the imbalance. And they make it their responsibility to change it. They know that diversity isn't just an HR metric, it's a leadership mandate. Because innovation is born from difference, and belonging is built by invitation. Nevertheless, tables have always been symbols of belonging. Who gets invited, who gets heard, and who gets served all reveal the dynamics of inclusion and exclusion. In many organizations, the table is where decisions are made, ideas are validated, and direction is set. Inclusive leaders understand that leadership is not simply about having a seat, it's about reshaping the table itself. They ask questions like, who's missing from this discussion? Whose perspective could change our understanding? How can I make it easier for someone else to contribute? This mindset transforms leadership from positional power to relational stewardship. From gatekeeping to table building. Years ago, a mid-level manager named Rosa attended a leadership conference. She was the only woman of color in her department, competent, consistent, and often overlooked. During a networking lunch, a senior executive noticed her thoughtful questions and invited her to join a strategy session later that afternoon. Rosa hesitated. I don't think I'm supposed to be in that meeting. The executive smiled and said, you are now. That single invitation changed the course of Rosa's career. But more importantly, it changed how she led others. Years later, when she became a director, Rosa made it a practice to bring rising voices into high-stakes discussions, sometimes even before they felt ready. That's what happens when leaders become table builders instead of gatekeepers. They create opportunities that ripple outward, long after the initial invitation. Traditional leadership often centers on gatekeeping, deciding who gets in, who stays out, and who climbs the ladder. But inclusive leadership flips that script. It's not about guarding access, it's about creating pathways. A true leader says, come sit with me, and then steps aside to ensure that others can be seen and heard. They don't fear being overshadowed, because they understand that when others shine, the entire organization becomes brighter. Consider leaders who have intentionally built platforms for others, those who mentor emerging voices, champion underrepresented perspectives, or hand over the mic at moments when it would be easier to keep speaking. Their legacy is not their title or tenure, it's the thriving network of people they've empowered. Mentorship as a leadership practice. Mentorship is the secret currency of leadership. It's how influence outlives position. When we mentor, we don't just pass on knowledge, we transfer courage. We say, I see you, before the world does. We say, you belong here, when someone still doubts it. Inclusive mentors go beyond advice, they create access. They recommend names in rooms of opportunity. They amplify voices when the person isn't present. They share credit publicly and give feedback privately. In doing so, they redefine success, not as individual ascent, but as collective elevation. Also, mentorship is one of the most powerful forms of influence. It's how leaders extend their impact beyond their own achievements. Great mentors do three things exceptionally well. 1. See potential before others do. 2. Speak possibility into those who doubt themselves. 3. Share power by creating real opportunities for growth. This isn't performative allyship, it's intentional investment. Inclusive mentors understand that representation without participation is hollow. They don't just endorse others, they equip them. The courage to step back. One of the most difficult transitions for any leader is learning to step back, to let others lead. It's tempting to stay at the center, to keep speaking, to maintain control. But inclusive leadership requires humility, the kind that finds joy in watching others succeed. I once worked with a CEO who, at the end of every quarterly presentation, would turn to a young analyst and say, "You lead this section." The first time, the analyst looked terrified. By the third time, he was presenting like a seasoned strategist. By the fifth, he had been promoted. That's what setting the table looks like in practice. It's handing the microphone over. It's stepping aside so someone else can stand taller. Empowering others requires humility, the courage to step back when the spotlight isn't yours to claim. Inclusive leaders are comfortable being the architect rather than the star. They know that success is not measured by how indispensable they become, but by how effectively they prepare others to lead. When you build leaders instead of followers, you create a culture that sustains itself long after your own voice quiets. Expanding the circle. Inclusion doesn't end with an invitation. Once people are at the table, leaders must ensure they are heard and valued. That means paying attention to the subtle things. Who speaks up and who does? Whose ideas get credit? What kind of language makes others feel smaller or invisible? Inclusive leaders are translators and amplifiers. They ensure every voice has weight, not just volume. They cultivate spaces where differences become strengths, where disagreement isn't disrespect, but a path to better decisions. It's not about perfection, it's about intention. Legacy, the tables you leave behind. One day, someone will tell the story of your leadership. They might not remember your title or your resume, but they will remember whether you made room for them. The true measure of leadership is not how high you climb, but how many you lift along the way. When you set the table for others and teach them to do the same, your influence multiplies across generations. You create a lineage of leaders who understand that power is not something to possess, but something to pass on. At the end of a leadership journey, titles fade and projects evolve. What remains are the people who grew under your influence, those who now set their own tables, inviting others in turn. True leadership legacy is measured not by how many people served you, but by how many people you served into leadership. Reflection questions. 1. Who helped you find your seat at the table? 2. How are you intentionally creating opportunities for others? 3. What barriers might exist in your organization that prevent diverse voices from being heard, and how can you remove them? 4. When was the last time you stepped back to let someone else lead? 5. How can you use your platform to highlight someone else's potential this week? Chapter 6. Sustaining the table, building cultures of belonging and shared leadership. It's one thing to invite people to the table. It's another to make sure they stay, not as guests, but as co-authors of what happens next. Inclusive leadership doesn't stop with invitation. It lives and breathes in the everyday culture that follows. Once a leader learns to open the door for others, the next challenge is to build a space where everyone feels ownership of the room. From inclusion to belonging. Inclusion is about presence. Belonging is about participation. When people feel merely included, they might sit at the table but hesitate to speak. When they feel belonging, they bring their full selves, ideas, identities, and instincts. because they trust that their voice will matter. A culture of belonging isn't built through slogans or one-time initiatives. It grows from consistent behaviors. Leaders who listen more than they talk. Meetings where diverse ideas are not just tolerated, but sought out. Decision-making that values perspective as much as performance. Belonging happens when people no longer feel they must shrink to fit in. The anatomy of a sustainable table. To sustain a culture of belonging, leaders must think like builders, not hosts. The table needs structure, intentional design, ongoing repair, and shared stewardship. One, shared leadership. Sustainable organizations decentralize power. They create systems where leadership flows through teams, not just from titles. When people at every level are trusted to lead, the culture becomes self-renewing. 2, psychological safety. Teams cannot innovate where they fear judgment. Harvard researcher Amy Edmondson calls this psychological safety, a shared belief that you can take risks, make mistakes, and still be respected. Without it, the table becomes silent. 3, accountability with empathy. Belonging doesn't mean comfort at all costs. It means being able to hold one another accountable within a foundation of respect. Leaders who sustain belonging balance grace with growth. They correct without humiliating, and they challenge without diminishing. The story of the round table. When Maya was promoted to lead a regional nonprofit, she inherited a leadership team divided by hierarchy. Department heads guarded information like currency, and collaboration was rare. In her first week, Maya replaced the long rectangular boardroom table with a circular one. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. "We're building something round," she said. "No sides, no head of the table, just shared purpose." At first, old habits lingered. People still deferred to hierarchy, still looked for permission to speak. But Maya modeled vulnerability, asking for feedback, admitting what she didn't know, inviting dissent. Slowly, the energy shifted. By year's end, cross-department projects had doubled. Employee satisfaction rose dramatically. And when new leaders were promoted, they carried the same round-table philosophy forward. Maya hadn't just changed the seating arrangement. She had changed the culture of power. Empowerment as a system, not a gesture. Many organizations celebrate empowerment as an act of generosity, leaders giving others opportunities. But in truly inclusive systems, empowerment isn't something you give. It's something you design into the structure. That means bullet transparent decision-making processes, bullet pathways for advancement that are equitable and visible, bullet feedback loops that move in all directions. When empowerment becomes systemic, belonging becomes sustainable. People stop waiting for permission to lead and start seeing leadership as a shared responsibility. Maintaining the table, ongoing work. Like any shared space, the table requires maintenance. Inclusion erodes quietly when leaders stop paying attention. Here are a few habits of leaders who sustain belonging over time. Bullet regular reflection. They ask, who have we stopped listening to? Bullet rituals of recognition. They celebrate contributions publicly, especially from those whose work is often unseen. Bullet intentional renewal. They revisit values and practices, ensuring they still serve the whole, not just the few. Sustaining inclusion isn't a project, it's a posture. Legacy, building tables that outlast you. The ultimate test of leadership is whether the table remains strong after you leave it. When you sustain a culture of belonging, you build something that doesn't depend on your presence. It thrives on shared ownership. People start pulling up their own chairs for others. They start inviting voices you never even knew to include. That's when you know you've done more than lead a team. You've started a movement. Reflection questions. 1. What behaviors in your organization reinforce belonging, and which quietly erode it? 2. How can you make leadership more distributed across your team? 3. When was the last time you revisited the table to see who might have been left standing? 4. What would it look like for your culture to thrive without you in the room? Chapter 7. Multiplying tables, how empowered leaders empower others. The measure of a leader is not how many people follow them, but how many people they empower to lead. Inviting others to the table is the first step. Sustaining a culture of belonging is the second. But the highest form of leadership, the kind that transforms teams, organizations, and even generations, is when leaders multiply tables. When they empower others not only to sit, but to build, lead, and extend new spaces of influence far beyond their own reach. From addition to multiplication. Many leaders think in terms of addition. How can I bring more people to my table? But multiplication requires a different question. How can I equip others to build tables of their own? Addition centers on the leader's presence. Multiplication centers on legacy. When you multiply leadership, you move from being the center of influence to being the catalyst of influence. The focus shifts from what I can do to what we can sustain together. This kind of leadership isn't accidental. It's designed, deliberate, and deeply relational. The story of the table builder. Years ago, when Njohole became the youngest vice president in his company's history, he made a quiet promise. I won't be the last. He remembered how many times he had been the only person of color in a room, the one who felt the weight of representation. So he set out to make sure the next generation didn't have to carry that same burden alone. Instead of focusing on maintaining his visibility, he invested in building a mentorship network. He started informal table talks on Friday afternoons, open forums where employees across departments could share challenges and ideas. Over time, those gatherings became incubators for talent and innovation. Within 5 years, 3 of his mentees had moved into executive roles. When asked about his success, Njohole smiled and said, "The point was never to keep my seat, it was to make sure the table kept growing." That's what multiplication looks like. Leadership becomes exponential when your influence shows up in the lives and leadership of others. The 4 practices of multiplying leaders. 1. Model transparency, not perfection. People don't replicate what you teach, they replicate what you live. When you lead with authenticity, sharing not only your wins but your lessons, you normalize growth and learning. Vulnerability becomes an invitation for others to lead boldly without the fear of failing publicly. 2. Empower through trust, not control. Micromanagement kills multiplication. Leaders who empower others give trust early and autonomy generously. They don't hand over only the tasks, they hand over ownership. 3. Build leadership pathways, not bottlenecks. Multiplying tables means creating clear, equitable pathways for others to step up. That might look like rotational leadership opportunities, shared decision-making processes, or mentorship programs that intentionally develop underrepresented voices. 4. Celebrate others loudly. Multiplying leaders shine the spotlight outward. They name names, they amplify accomplishments, they make success contagious. When the table outgrows you. It can be uncomfortable when people you've mentored start leading at levels beyond your own. But this is precisely the goal of multiplication, to build successors who surpass you. Healthy leaders celebrate being outgrown. They take pride in seeing others expand the vision, refine the systems, and take the organization further than they could alone. Multiplying leadership requires the humility to release control and the faith to trust that your investment will bear fruit, even in places you'll never see. Legacy beyond your reach. The greatest leaders understand that influence doesn't end when they leave the room. It continues through the people they've empowered. Think of the teacher whose students go on to teach others. The manager whose interns become department heads. The mentor whose proteges build new networks of opportunity. Each one has multiplied the table, creating ripples of leadership that extend across industries, communities, and generations. You don't have to lead thousands to change the world. You just have to build someone who will. Reflection questions. 1. Who are you currently developing to lead when you're not in the room? 2. What would it look like to give others real ownership, not just responsibility? 3. How can you ensure your leadership practices are multiplying, not bottlenecking, influence? 4. What legacy of empowerment do you want to leave behind? Closing thought. Setting the table for others is powerful. Sustaining the table is essential. But the true magic of leadership happens when others begin to build tables of their own, each one a reflection of the generosity, trust, and vision you chose to model. That's when leadership becomes infinite. Chapter 8. The Infinite Table, Legacy, Renewal, and Leadership That Lasts. There comes a moment in every leader's journey when the table they've built no longer belongs to them. It belongs to the people they've empowered, to the culture they've shaped, and to the generations they've prepared to lead next. That's when leadership becomes infinite. It no longer depends on your presence, your voice, or your authority. It continues because you've built something that can renew itself, a table that grows, evolves, and multiplies without end. Leadership as a living ecosystem. Most people think of leadership as a position. The best leaders know it's an ecosystem. Every word spoken, every opportunity shared, every person mentored, it all adds to the soil. Some seeds sprout quickly, others take years to bloom. But when you lead with intention and generosity, you create conditions where growth becomes continuous. Your impact lives in the unseen roots, in the courage you sparked in someone else, the confidence you restored, the vision you passed on. That's how legacy works. It's less about what you leave behind and more about what you set in motion. When power becomes stewardship. Infinite leadership begins when power turns from possession to stewardship. When leaders stop asking, "How much can I gain?" and start asking, "How much can I give?" In many organizations, power is seen as a finite resource, a limited pie to be divided. But inclusive, enduring leadership treats power as renewable. The more you share it, the more it grows. Stewardship is about holding influence with open hands. It's knowing that what passes through your leadership is bigger than you. It's about tending to people, principles, and purpose so that they outlast your time at the table. The story of the empty chair. One of the most beloved traditions at a small social enterprise in Uganda involves an empty chair at every team meeting. It represents the person not yet here, the future team member, partner, or community voice who will one day join the conversation. Whenever decisions are made, someone inevitably asks, "What would the person in the empty chair think?" That ritual is more than symbolism. It's a commitment to the future, to those who will inherit the work, shape it, and make it better. Leaders who think infinitely always keep an empty chair at the table. They know the story doesn't end with them. The renewal of the table. Every culture, every team, every generation needs renewal. Even the strongest table can grow worn if not maintained. Infinite leaders understand that sustainability requires both preservation and adaptation. They ask questions like, what still serves us and what must evolve? Whose voices have emerged that we haven't yet heard? How do we honor the past while creating space for what's next? Renewal doesn't mean erasing what was built. It means ensuring that what's built remains alive. Legacy as a living conversation. Legacy is often misunderstood as a monument, something static, etched in stone. But true legacy is conversational. It's the echo of your leadership in someone else's story. When you empower others to lead, your influence travels further than you could ever walk. When you sustain a culture of belonging, your principles become practice in rooms you'll never enter. When you multiply tables, your vision becomes a movement, passed hand to hand, story to story. Legacy is not the table you sat at. It's the thousands of tables built because you decided to set one. The infinite table. The infinite table isn't physical. It's a mindset, a belief that leadership is never finished. Someone is always arriving. Someone is always learning. Someone is always preparing to lead next. The table expands with every invitation, every voice heard, every story honored. And though your role may change, Your influence remains woven into its design. The table doesn't end where your reach does. It continues where your impact lives. Reflection questions. 1. Who might inherit the table you've built, and how are you preparing them now? 2. What empty chair do you need to keep open in your leadership for future voices? 3. How can your leadership model renewal, not just preservation? 4. What story of empowerment do you hope others tell because of you? Closing thought. One day, someone will sit at a table you never saw, in a room you never entered, and speak words you once whispered into existence. That's leadership that lasts. That's legacy. That's the infinite table. Chapter 9. Epilogue. When the table is yours. There comes a time when the table is quiet. The last conversation fades, the last story lingers in the air, and you look around to see what has been built, not by your hands alone, but by the hands you invited to join you. Leadership, at its core, was never about control. It was about creation. It was about crafting a space where truth could be spoken, courage could be practiced, and humanity could be seen. Each chapter of this journey has asked something deeper of you. To set the table for others. To sustain belonging. To multiply leadership. And finally, to release legacy into the hands of those who will take it further than you ever could. The table as a circle. In the end, leadership comes full circle. You begin at the edge, uncertain, hopeful, learning from those who came before you. You earn your seat, not through perfection but through persistence. And when you've grown enough to lead, the circle expands again, making room for the next voice, the next vision, the next beginning. That's the rhythm of the table. Give, receive, return. The quiet work of continuity. The world celebrates the loud moments of leadership, the keynote, the award, the milestone. But legacy is built in the quiet work of continuity. The meeting where you let someone else speak. The decision that reflects a shared value. The late-night note that says, "I see your potential." These moments rarely trend or sparkle. But they echo. They multiply. They last. Your turn. The table is yours now. What will you build? Who will you invite? What voices will you amplify until they echo across rooms you'll never enter? Because one day, someone will look back and see you as the person who made room for them. And when they do, they won't just remember your leadership. They'll remember how it made them feel, seen, trusted, and necessary. That's the essence of inclusive leadership. That's what it means to build an infinite table. Final reflection. May your table always have one empty chair for the next generation, one open hand to lift another, one shared story that reminds everyone why they belong. And when your part is done, may you find joy in knowing the conversation continues.